Hey, Unruly Subjects, it's Chinjirai, and I need your help to keep the show going strong. If you love what we do here, consider supporting us by joining our Patreon community. It's the best way to back the show, and you get some incredible benefits in return. Membership starts at just $5 a month. I mean, there's nothing that cheap, at least in New York. And you immediately get ad-free episodes and exclusive premium episodes. That includes interview outtakes and other extras you ain't gonna hear anywhere else. But that's not all. You can access the Unruly chat and polls. When we have a live event, you're gonna get the pre-sale tickets and the merch. Oh my God, the merch. You know the merch is gonna be fly. And you receive invitations to our Q&A live streams and, my favorite, our annual exclusive hangout with me, the producers, and a special guest. So yo, come on people, join the Unruly mob. Visit patreon.com/unrulysubjects. And thank you for making this show possible. Rohome Productions. Hey yo, what's going on? What's going on, Lord? How you feeling, man?
I'm good. How you, my brother?
Hey yo, man, it's cold as shit out here in New York, man. You know what I mean?
I can only imagine because it's mad cold down south too, bro.
Bro, it's different up here. It's like, I don't know what these quarter zip guys gonna do, man. Cause I was getting ready to go take my daughter to the bus, right? And it was like, the guy was like, yo, it's like, whatever it was, like 20 degrees, feels like 0. I had to put on the knit shiesty to take her to the, it looked like a robbery at the school bus, you know what I mean? When I rolled up, like, you know what I mean? It was like, and then, the knit shiesty wasn't warm enough. I had to actually put on the regular joint and then put the knit shiesty over it. That's how cold it was, man. But yo, real quick, I'm trying to do these drops, man. I need you to hit me with that drop for the show, man. Can you do that?
I got you.
All right.
My name is D Noble, and when I need to take a break from organizing or reading some George Jackson or Audre Lorde, I'm tuning in to Unruly Subjects, stimulating my mind, getting some good laughs, and getting that overall good news with my main man, Chinjirai Kumanyika. You should do the same, you heard?
What up, y'all? Yeah, welcome to Unruly Subjects. Know what I'm saying? It's cold out there, but it's warm over here. Shout out to my wife, Sadaka. Shout out to my daughter, Yola. Shout out to Rohome Productions. Yeah. I don't even want to waste time today, because this episode we got today is dangerous. Like, if you want to play it safe, turn it off right now. Turn it off. You got permission to turn it off because what we about to do is like, listen. The reason why this episode is so dangerous this week is because we have this incredible professor and organizer named Daryl Lee, and he's going to talk about a report about the weaponization of civil rights law to repress campus speech on Palestine. That's how we're getting down. We're not playing. We're getting right to it. I mean, I think that you all, listen, we're all living in this reality where, of course we have a deep commitment to anti-racism in all its forms, including anti-Semitism. I've taught about anti-Semitism for years in my classes, but somehow we find ourselves in this world where anything critical of the state of Israel, you almost find yourself, terrified to even launch a critique of a country. So Daryl Lee is going to talk about how we got there. But before we do that, I want to follow up on something that we did last week. Last week, we had Daniel Coates. Daniel Coates is an organizer who worked with Make the Road, but he also was one of the founders of a coalition called Hands Off NYC. They're this huge coalition that's helping New York basically understand its rights around ICE, prepare people to intervene when ICE, is going beyond what's legal and all kinds of things, right? And so he came on and broke down Hands Off ICE, talked about how people can get involved and gave him suggestions beyond New York. But he also talked about this weekend of action, which was this past weekend. And after doing that, I was like, I really want to get involved with this, right? I didn't want to just be like, have Daniel on the show, like y'all go do this and then we don't do it. But one of the battles we face is, look, I have a 6-year-old daughter. If you've listened to Empire City, you'll know that, my daughter has a lot of trauma around policing, as I'm sure a lot of folks do. So one of the first things we had to solve if we really wanted to do this was we had to figure out some childcare.
Hey.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on, if we're going to be able to, what the plan is for this hands-off NYC. Are you seeing any prospects for childcare over there?
Not really. I mean, where did Pedro was here? I could ask if she could hang with them for an hour.
The other thing is, I could also bring her with us and just explain it. You know what I mean? So it matters because, well, I guess either way, I got to be back around the same time. I'm just trying to figure out what time I got to be back. All right. Well, you're going to call me back and let me know what Pedro says?
Yeah.
All right.
So eventually we figured it out, right? A friend of ours, agreed to watch our daughter for about an hour and a half. And so I headed out. And my first stop was at one of the Hands Off NYC events that was taking place at a table in Washington Square Park.
All right, what's up, y'all? We out here in Washington Square Park. Who am I with?
My name is Jim Gordon, and we're at Washington Square Park's Extinction Rebellion table that is here every weekend. And this week, we're also partnering with the worthy group Hands Off New York, because there's a direct correlation between the climate crisis, people having to leave the places they've always lived and coming legally and illegally. People are getting taken for coming here because they have nowhere else to go. And so we are working in partnership to stop the climate crisis and to make people aware that there is a growing fascist governmental entity that is taking people away. And if we don't stop these two trends, it's only going to get worse. I'm encouraged because I know that we know what to do to stop the climate crisis. We have invented everything we need to invent. It is the greed and the powers that be that are preventing us from doing that. I'm also very encouraged about stopping the rise of fascism because people are stepping up. Hands Off New York. Lots of people are stepping up to fight back. And this is one we are going to win. And when we win, we'll be a stronger country, a stronger nation, and a stronger planet for it. But we need the people. We need people to start stepping up. And as I said, I'm encouraged to see people doing that.
Awesome. All right. We really appreciate what you're doing. You got me some whistles and got me some information. Much respect.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so after Washington Square Park, I went to this really interesting training by Village Independent Democrats. The whole point of the training was that we were getting ready to teach businesses what their rights are when it comes to ICE and how they can protect their employees. So we did the training and then we went out, and it was interesting for me to go out to businesses because, one of the first instructions we had is like, you got to get the manager. You kind of got to get these businesses to have the conversation. And so you had to be a little aggressive. And aggressive is not, in the body that I'm in as a 6-foot black man, I'm not usually aggressive when I go into a business. I usually am trying to be polite, trying to get people to actually listen to what I'm saying. And in that regard, it was interesting because a lot of the people who were at this training and the people I went out with were not black men. They were white folks, and they were aggressive, in a respectful way, but they were respectfully aggressive. And I was like, yeah, they were bringing that, can I talk to the manager energy, but using it for the people. And they taught the businesses things like ICE doesn't have the right to go into private spaces in the business. They could be in the front part of a restaurant, for example, with everybody else, but they can't get to the employees at the back unless they got a specific kind of warrant. And we had the paperwork to show them what that warrant is, exactly what needs to be on it. There was all kinds of materials they had to educate the employees, but it was deep to see a business response. And if you have a business, I would encourage you can designate an area of your business as private space. You can print up a sign and make it clear what is the part that the public can be in and what's the part that they can't. And that could be really important because, maybe even if you don't have employees yourself who are targeted, sometimes a business next to you might have somebody who might need to come into your private space for safety. And again, all of this is because the rules themselves that ICE is being asked to enforce are completely unethical and probably illegal. But yeah, it's just good to really understand what the rights are here and that it's a business response, an institutional response. This can't just be on individuals. My wife was out there a little longer and she had, a really powerful experience. And she told me about it in a phone call later.
Wow, it was amazing. I'm like, I want to do this every weekend. It was, we stopped by a bunch of different, establishments, a lot of restaurants, and, people were really appreciative. So it's like the information we provided was well received. But, I just felt like, wow, I'm actually doing something. It just felt good to just inform people and basic knowledge, like, putting up this sign, this private space sign can make a difference, just people are like, I didn't know this, like I thought they could just come and take whoever. I didn't know that we could, ask for these things. And just when we talked about warrants, right, and the distinction between administrative warrants versus judicial warrants and like what to look out for. And yeah, we stopped at, oh my God, the owner of this e-bike store that we went to. He was amazing. He literally ripped down one sign in his store to place the private, like, this is a private area sign right there. He was like, thank you so much. He told us like one of their workers was actually detained, and he gets a lot of, like the e-bike
Oh, yeah, of course.
workers in his store. He's like, this is going to be helpful for my customers. And, I can just tell them to come on this side of the store. And, he was really thankful. And, that was kind of the vibe, We stopped by LGBTQ Center, and like, it was like empowering. It was empowering for me. And I think also the employees and, the different people we spoke to, managers and owners, to just know what to do and that there is something to do, because we can all feel just like I felt really helpless and, but knowledge is power. And
it's also important to note that this was made possible by childcare. See what we could do when you have childcare.
Yes.
So that was really important.
Thank you so much. Oh my God.
Yeah. So that was like a key part. All right. Since we're recording, I'm gonna hop off.
All right.
Peace. So that was it, and I just wanted to give y'all that update. That work is going to be continuing. So everybody go to Hands Off NYC. I know there's similar coalitions all over the country, and get involved. You know what I'm saying? And one reason why I really wanted to share with y'all how we got involved with Hands Off NYC is because at Unruly Subjects, we're accountable to the moment and to you. And we want to keep it that way, right? We don't want to ever have to answer to a corporation. So we need you to go over to unrulysubjectspodcast.com. You can subscribe to the free Patreon. You know what I mean? Maybe you're not ready to do the annual subscription, although I'm seeing more people get that annual subscription. You know what I'm saying? They're getting involved. Yeah, because it's like once they do that, they know they're a part of the journey. You know what I'm saying? They ain't got to think about it for another year. So, and look, this week over there, we're gonna have our hotline responses. So that's definitely a reason for you to go there, because last week's hotline question involved questions about how we raise our kids and whether those kids are have to do with culture or what they have to do with. So we're gonna respond to that, but it's gonna be over on the free Patreon. And also we got News Fiend over there. So it's a lot of news always going on. So you wanna go down that news rabbit hole. We'll have longer versions of some of the segments and interviews. So yeah, it's lots of stuff happening there. We want you to be involved with what we're building. So go over to unrulysubjectspodcast.com and get involved. All right, y'all. After the break, we have our main interview coming up with Daryl Lee. And just to set the stage for this, over the past couple of years, we've watched universities and a number of institutions crack down on speech that is critical of Israel, right? Like any speech, including protests. And this is often justified as a fight against anti-Semitism. So y'all may know that I serve on the National Council of the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors. And we've collaborated with the Middle East Studies Association to release this report on this process that really talks about how the idea of anti-Semitism is being weaponized. Now, of course, as an organization, as individuals, we have, huge commitments to fighting anti-Semitism, right? We're not down for hate in any kind of expression. But what this report argues and it provides all the receipts is a couple of things that really are shocking. First, that the way that speech is being suppressed is they're using a civil rights law, right? A law that was passed back in 1964 that was initially meant to fight racism, and they're now twisting it to suppress speech, right? It's Title VI, and Daryl Lee's going to break that down. But the other thing is that this is not just a Trump story. This has really been going on for a while, and it really included some moves by Obama and Biden. So it's not just a story about Republicans, right? And it goes also beyond just academic freedom or what's happening in higher ed, although, of course, what's happening in higher ed is important, right? This whole sort of issue where you can claim anything as anti-Semitism and use civil rights law to do that, this is now a key part of the agenda that's going to empower the Trump administration and people who think like him to push back on a whole bunch of social justice issues. So we're going to have Daryl Lee, and he's an anthropologist and legal scholar who thinks mostly about questions of war, law, migration, empire, all those kinds of things. He's also just a phenomenal storyteller, and he's going to break it all down, how we got here. I haven't seen anybody go as in-depth as we're going on this, and so Daryl Lee is going to break it down after the break. Hey, Unruly Subjects, it's Chinjirai, and I need your help to keep the show going strong. If you love what we do here, consider supporting us by joining our Patreon community. It's the best way to back the show, and you get some incredible benefits in return. Membership starts at just $5 a month. I mean, there's nothing that cheap, at least in New York. And you immediately get ad-free episodes and exclusive premium episodes. That includes interview outtakes and other extras you ain't gonna hear anywhere else. But that's not all. You can access the Unruly chat and polls. When we have a live event, you're gonna get the pre-sale tickets and the merch. Oh my God, the merch. You know the merch is gonna be fly. And you receive invitations to our Q&A live streams and, my favorite, our annual exclusive hangout with me, the producers, and a special guest. So yo, come on people, join the Unruly mob. Visit patreon.com/unrulysubjects. And thank you for making this show possible. This episode of Unruly Subjects is brought to you by Haymarket Books, which has loads of great left-wing titles, perfect for listeners like you. And one that I know you're going to feel is The Extended Universe, How Disney Killed the Movies and Took Over the World by Vicky Osterweil. A provocative history of Disney's rise to cultural dominance, The Extended Universe pulls skeletons from the corporate closet to decode the political messages hidden in all your favorite childhood movies. In The Extended Universe, Vicky Osterweil takes us on a quest to discover how Disney's Imagineers have made it impossible to reflect on the wonders of growing up without thinking of Disney's movies, amusement parks, and merchandising. Drawing on extensive interviews with filmmakers, screenwriters, union organizers, and Disney adults alike, Osterweil unearths reactionary political commitments and maleficent legal maneuvers so cartoonishly evil they would make one of Walt's own animated villains blush. As Natasha Leonard puts it, Osterweil is the brilliant, generous, and revolutionary guide we need to rethink cultural production today and kill the mouse inside our heads. Find The Extended Universe at haymarketbooks.org, where all hardcover books are 10% off every day. What's up, Unruly Subjects? Give a warm, unruly welcome to Daryl Lee. That's how we get down, Daryl. You know what I mean? We appreciate you. You know what I mean?
I love it.
I know you are a busy person. Real quick, by way of introduction, Daryl Lee is an anthropologist and lawyer teaching at the University of Chicago. He's co-author of the study Discriminating Against Dissent, the Weaponization of Civil Rights Law to Repress Campus Speech on Palestine, published by the AAUP and Middle East Studies Association. Full disclosure, I am on the National Council of the AAUP, so, people should know that. But yeah, I wanted to bring Daryl in because I read this report and I was like, listen, I've been watching what's been happening where it seems like anytime you say anything about Israel, you try to talk about the genocide that's occurring or anything, it's like you're immediately slapped with anti-Semitism, and universities and government institutions and all these seem to be, you have using this in all these ways that has touched an enormous amount of people. So I was really, when I saw that there's a report that systematically breaks down what's going on, not just like anecdotal, he said, she said, what about this, what about that? Like, it's just really going into the details. I was so excited. So Daryl, I want to start out by really setting the stakes for this, because I think that, if you haven't been through this, people may not understand or need to be reminded like what this actually looks like. So is there a particular example of someone being targeted in one of these investigations that you could flesh out for us?
Well, I think to get a sense of how wild some of these things are, we found an example of a complaint for anti-Semitism that was filed with the federal government against Cornell University. And the substantive part of the complaint, it was submitted through a website, is just one paragraph. If you want, I can read that paragraph to you just to give you a sense of how these things operate.
Please. Yeah.
It names a professor, but the name's been redacted, so we don't know who it is. But it says, a certain professor, quote, has spread so much hate and lies, pushing people towards violence. He is supporting Hamas being misspelled, and their beliefs. He is literally brainwashing students to hate and discriminate towards a certain religion's, typo, Jews, end quotation. That's the whole complaint. And on the basis of that complaint, the federal government sent a letter to Cornell University saying, you are now under investigation for violating civil rights law. And we're going to do the bureaucratic equivalent of turning you upside down, shaking you till all the change falls out of your pockets. We're going to audit all your...
What? Hold on, slow. So
yes,
there's not even any specific empirical... Is there like an account or something that's in as part of that complaint you just read? Or
no, I just read to you the whole substantive part of the complaint.
You mean to tell me you could get the whole federal government apparatus going in this investigation with that?
Yes. The federal government under the Biden administration, the Department of Education, sent a letter to Cornell University and basically said, we're going to audit you guys. We're going to investigate you guys. So that's just one striking example of all it takes to get the power of the federal government brought down onto universities. Now, this was a pretty infrequent thing before October 7th, 2023. So from 2004 until October 7th, the entire time when this was a possibility, there were only 25 government investigations for anti-Semitism. Sorry, there were only 24, I should say. Then between October 7th and the end of 2023, we have 25 investigations. So in those 2 months, more investigations than in the 2 decades, or almost 2 decades that came before. So a real explosion. And then in 2024, the record gets broken again. And in 2025, we're on track to break the record yet again. So we found 102 of these letters. And what we found is that in 50% of these complaints, there's only criticisms of Israel or Zionism that don't mention Jews or Judaism or what have you. Right. Now, we have another 29% that might be a little bit mixed, where it's mostly criticisms of Israel or Zionism, but you might have 1 or 2 examples thrown in there of, let's say, a swastika graffiti in a bathroom stall, right? Or a student getting a slur directed at them on social media, right? But that might be a case where if there's only 1 or 2 of those things thrown in, and the vast majority of it is also political speech. And this is important because it's not the job of the federal government to go in and say, did people say things that were anti-Semitic or not? The legal standard here is harassment and a hostile environment, right? So, in this country, for better or for worse, it's not illegal to make a comment that's racist or discriminatory, right? We have professors in this country who use the N-word in their lectures, pretty much routinely, and people may protest about it, but there's no federal investigation, right? The standard here is you need to have discrimination that rises to the level of harassment. It has to be it has to be severe, it has to be pervasive, usually a pattern, right? That kind of adds up to a discriminatory environment, right? So if you have a situation where there's like 12 instances of criticizing Israel and 1 instance of, an anti-Semitic, of a swastika graffiti in a bathroom stall, it's hard to see how that's going to add up to a hostile environment unless you also are treating that political speech that's criticizing Israel as a form of discrimination.
Right. I mean, but the 50% that only mention Israel or Zionism are interesting because, you know, those are criticisms that a lot of Jewish people I know have, right? They themselves are critical of the state of Israel.
Oh, of course.
And many of Zionism. And so let's rewind a little bit.
Can I just jump in with some
sure,
the other big thing that jumped out and that we were not expecting when we started this research is the explosion in anti-Semitism investigations in higher ed came at the same time as a decrease in racial harassment investigations in higher ed, right? So between October 7th, 2023 and the end of 2024, the Biden administration opened 65 anti-Semitism probes against colleges and universities, and they only opened 38 for all other kinds of racial harassment put together, right? So you get a real sense of the shift in priorities here. And of course, under Trump, racial harassment investigations just stop altogether. But the Biden administration was already kind of, appears to have been shifting resources in that direction in a way that kind of, you know, betrayed the core commitments of their own kind of like of their own political coalition, to be honest.
Right. Like here, you know, you think about it, Biden is elected partially on the momentum of movements that had risen up in response to like George Floyd, police harassment, all kinds of other groups that saw him as the candidate who would at least try to push some type of progress of racial empowerment and stopping racial discrimination. And what you're saying is that partially in relation to these investigations, you see a decrease in investigations of other kind of harassment. And I mean, those are both stunning findings. And I think that when we
go
another
example of the Democrats kneecapping their own base for the sake of Israel.
That's it. No, let's just say it. Let's say what it is. Come on. You know what I mean? So I think some of that can make more sense when we talk about how the history of this, like where this comes from. So some of this goes back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Can you take us back there and help us understand what is that? We want to break it down. And then how did this start to get tinkered with to bring us to where we're at right now?
Yeah, so this is it's a perverse outcome because Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act is a landmark piece of civil rights legislation, right? And it comes out of the Black freedom struggle. It comes out of the movement against Jim Crow, segregation in schools, and all these things. And the basic idea behind Title VI is if an institution receives federal funding, then they cannot engage in discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. Now, Title VI applies broadly. It doesn't apply only to schools, but schools happen to be one of the major places where Title VI plays out because of all of the things around segregation in schooling and so on. So Title VI was a really important part of sort of the racial liberalism and reformism of the civil rights movement in the civil rights era. Now, the policy under Title VI has evolved over the years, right? So the original idea was that the institutions could not engage in discrimination, right? So again, think back to segregation and things like that. Right. Over time, there developed this other idea that institutions also have an obligation to do something if people at those institutions engage in discrimination, right? So for example, you might have a situation where, let's say, white supremacists in a school system are harassing Black students, right? You don't want the school to be able to say, oh, well, we don't have to, we're not the ones doing the discrimination, so we have no obligations here. We wash our hands of the matter. Like, no, the government came to the interpretation of this law to say, well, that's not right. You also have to take steps to stop a hostile environment if it emerges on your campus or in your institution. Right. So, and then of course, institutions also have the obligation to not retaliate against people when they make complaints under Title VI. So that's kind of the general landscape of how Title VI enforcement has been working in this country, for the past something like a half century.
But in the 90s, there's this a lawyer named Kenneth Marcus, right? Apparently, at that point, he's working for a law firm. Is it true that one of his colleagues was Ted Cruz?
Yes. Yeah.
How does he enter this picture, and what effect does his influence start to have on Title VI?
Yeah, so Marcus is a really interesting figure in all of this. He's a young conservative lawyer who's coming up in the 90s. He actually helped found one of the first, or perhaps the first, Jewish Republican Political Action Committee. And he was very explicit that the goal of this PAC was to support what he called, I think, something like a militarily strong United States and this militarily secure Israel, right? So he had a very clear idea about linking these two things. And, to be honest, that was a very common position in the Democratic Party at the time. Among Republicans were also pro-Israel, but actually not quite to the same extent. So Marcus was kind of, in a small way, pushing a rock up a hill, right? Even though on other conservative priorities, he was very much aligned, right? So he's in that kind of right-wing legal world, right? And that's why he's at a law firm with Ted Cruz, for example. And when George W. Bush comes into power in 2001, he's one of these young, eager conservative lawyers who get jobs in the Bush administration. So he eventually ends up in the Department of Education, in the Office of Civil Rights, whose job is to enforce Title VI. And, he's a pretty faithful conservative civil rights practitioner, which is another way of saying, his job is to help dismantle civil rights enforcement. And that's something we saw, with the Reagan administration, with the first Bush administration. So he's doing all sorts of things, against affirmative action and so on. But unlike some of the other folks in this conservative coalition, he's also really keen to support Israel. And the early 2000s, that is the time of the second intifada, or uprising in Palestine. So you have a wave of college protest at that time, nothing like what we have today, but still, pretty significant. So he gets to thinking about how this protest can be thought of as a kind of hostile environment, as a form of discrimination. But he's got a few obstacles. The first obstacle is that at that time, no one interpreted Title VI to cover discrimination against Jewish people. Right? Because Jews, insofar as you see them as a religious group, there was this idea that if you're discriminating against a religious group, that's a First Amendment issue, because the First Amendment, protects freedom of religion.
Right.
Jews are not a race, therefore they're not race, color, or national origin under the terms of the Civil Rights Act.
Right. These things would be seen like religious disputes, and the First Amendment kind of covers people's rights to express different views on that. So what does he do?
So he's like, Title VI should cover anti-Semitism as well, even though Jews are not technically a group defined as race, color, or national origin. So he puts out this letter in 2004. And what's wild is the letter comes around the third anniversary of 9/11. And in this letter, he points to the fact that there was all sorts of anti-Muslim violence and bigotry in the United States after 9/11, and says, this is a really important reason to expand our definition of Title VI to include religious groups, or groups that are not conventionally thought of as racial groups, because we have to protect Muslims, Arabs, and of course Jews. He made that point, and a lot of people could sort of nod along and be like, okay.
After the post 9/11, we know the horrific surveillance of Muslims. So you could see where, okay, maybe we have to adjust the interpretation of Title VI a little bit here. But you're also saying this was kind of part of a longer project. That was an opportune moment to overcome this one obstacle he had.
Yeah, he wrote this letter that said we have to protect, Muslims and Sikhs and Jews, all these religious groups from discrimination. Okay, after he put out that letter, within a few weeks, the Department of Education received a complaint of anti-Semitism against students protesting for Palestine at the University of California, Irvine. He did not open a bunch of investigations against anti-Muslim discrimination or anti-Sikh discrimination, right? But he did receive this complaint from the ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America. And in his memoir, he talks about the fact that he went around the normal procedure to personally approve this case for investigation, right? He said the normal procedure was the complaint arrives at the regional office and they decide what to do with it. But instead, they went straight to the top. They went straight to Washington. And he personally said, yes, this complaint is valid. Let's open an investigation. And again, I'm just describing what he wrote in his own book.
Wow.
Okay. Now, a few months after this, he gets a new job. He gets moved over to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, where he pursues a very similar agenda. And the rest of the Bush team at the Department of Education walks back his policy. because these are like traditional conservative Republicans who are so hostile to civil rights law and so hostile to expanding interpretations of civil rights law in any way that they actually decide, yeah, this Marcus thing, this whole like covering anti-Semitism as a form of racial discrimination, man, we don't want to go there.
Damn. So they actually were like, yo, even given the agenda to try to change Title VI, they were like, nah. If they, anything that protects anybody's civil rights, we not fucking with that.
Exactly.
Damn.
So that investigation against Irvine did not, it got closed eventually, right? So Marcus, it's interesting. He was kind of pushing something that even within the Republican coalition, I don't know if I'd call it controversial, but it wasn't like a sure bet, right? That there wasn't a consensus that this was a thing that needed to happen, right? He really, you needed someone, right place, right time, right background, right agenda to push this idea out, and it stalled, right? It kind of didn't really go anywhere until Obama.
Wow. Daryl, feel like you're about to roll out something that's going to make us think critically about the charming one. Tell us the truth. Only the facts.
Only the facts.
Yes.
So the policy. So Marcus's policy was resurrected from the dead by the Obama administration. I think the key moment, of course, that I'm sure you'll recall is the repudiation of the Reverend Jeremiah Wright.
Ooh.
It was because of his allegedly, un-American comments about 9/11. But, Jeremiah Wright was also a critic of Israel, right? And that moment was the moment where Obama had to make a choice. He had to tell the Democratic establishment, I'm not another Jesse Jackson.
Now, let me just say this, right? And I want to be clear. Like, it was really disheartening to me the way that Obama rejected Wright, especially because Wright was spitting bars. Like, you see, I saw one of those press conferences. Yo, Dale, they could not handle him. He was like, did you read this? Did you read that? He was like, well, don't even talk to me. I can't even talk to these people. You know what I mean? Like, the things that he's saying, he said, listen, he said, when I say goddamn America, he said, I believe God doesn't bless everything. Some things have to be condemned. You know what I'm saying? I was like, man, I was like, bars. So to see Obama back away from that and really, not just back away, like you said, reject, that was disheartening. But if you look at the long history of the Israel lobby, both in the UK and here, it could be argued that by the time Obama comes in, this is a powerful lobby. And once you get in office, the landscape looks different. And you got to figure out how you're going to get things done. And you have to do that based on the conditions that have existed. So is there a way to say, on the one hand, we have whatever predisposition Democrats and Obama have, but the left also has to say, have we created the conditions and incentives around a political situation that enable the politicians to move in the way we want?
Yes.
Because if they're not, then at that moment when a politician says, look, I can't take, because we saw some of these same issues play out with, the squad, right? Some of the DSA, it's like on one hand, we want you to say this and this and that. I want to hear people say this. Like watching some of these politicians not be able to name something as a genocide is terrible to me. Like, you should be able to say it, but I also do get I also want, listen, those people are chess pieces. I want them in the police and the chessboard where we can win policies. So absolutely. I hope I'm not playing like devil's advocate. I'm just really trying to understand what you think about this.
No, not at all. I completely agree. It's important to understand what politicians did and when and hold them accountable. And that's why we're talking about Obama. But I'm not that interested in kind of having a moral judgment on the man himself, because there's a good argument to be made that like once he's in that position under those conditions, it's not clear how different he could have been, at least on some of the core issues. So let's fast forward. Biden used Title VI as a cudgel to shut down Palestine protest on campuses. Trump picks up that cudgel and turns it into a battering ram for his war on higher ed. Because Trump isn't just about crushing Palestine protests. He has a whole right-wing agenda about undoing the civil rights movement, right? Undoing steps towards gender and racial equality, and that sees higher ed as the fat, juicy target for this, right? So all those conservative agendas, against affirmative action, DEI, whatever. Now, anti-Semitism and the weaponization of anti-Semitism claims, that's the tip of the spear. That's what happened, because that is the issue where the right understands that there's a lot of liberals who agree with them, right?
Right, and also just historically, campuses have been engines for pushing forward certain aspects of social justice. This is not to mean that the universities are not themselves functioning as oppressive forces, but that if you look at the civil rights movement, you look at all, Vietnam War, you look at all these workers, it's like campuses are places where people are learning to think critically, coming together, encampments, the whole shebang. Let's bring this back to the this report and what happens with Title VI and the IRA, and eventually move to the IRA definition of anti-Semitism.
Right. Okay, so IRA is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It's an organization that I don't think anyone has ever really heard of outside of the context of just they made a definition, right? And people just started talking about this thing as if it's a thing, right? Like you or I could just get up and make a definition of whatever, right? But it doesn't mean anything. But here, this organization created a definition, and then that definition suddenly was something that everyone had to have a response to, right? Either they were for it or against it. And, there was all this pressure to kind of adopt it. Now, I'm not going to read the whole I've pulled it up. I can't read the whole thing because it's way too long. But so there's two things. There's a definition, and then there's the examples that come with the definition, right? So the definition is anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So that's a little vague.
Right.
It's like, what does that mean? A certain perception, I don't know,
right,
which may be expressed as hatred. Okay, hatred towards Jews, that's pretty clear. We don't want hatred of Jews as Jews, right? So then in order to flesh out this really broad, vague definition, there's all these examples, right? And this is where it gets kind of interesting, right? So, for example, they have drawing comparisons of contemporary Israel policy to that of the Nazis, right? Full stop. Now, comparing two things, you can compare any two things. And when you compare something to another thing, you're talking about how they're alike, but you're also talking about how they might be different, right? But under this situation, if any comparison between Israel's policy and Nazi policy is automatically anti-Semitism, right? Whether that comparison is grounded in fact, whether it's, whether it is illuminating or not, right? There might be good comparisons, there might be bad comparisons, or comparisons that are more or less useful. But under this framework, it's anti-Semitism, period.
Right. And I think that that's important because those comparisons are useful. Again, learning the lessons, one of the things that I learned actually about the Holocaust, right, was that there was a certain kind of ground laid beforehand, right before the most extreme acts of violence culturally that caused people, for Jews to be dehumanized in this context in Germany. And was, that was part of the game. So it was there were stages to what unfolded with the Third Reich, right? And I think that those are, to me, some of the quintessential examples that we can use all around the world to say dehumanization. I mean, it's not the only example. There's many, many other examples, but that's one of them where you can see it really clearly. But the idea that you can't even compare it as a scholar, as a historian, as a critical thinker, and that by comparing it, you're now anti-Semitic is wild.
It's totally wild. And it's also weird because people inside Israel compare what is being done to Palestinians to Nazi policies every day of the week. So they create these third rails in public discourse. I mean, this happens all the time. Celebrities, journalists, you always, once in a while, there's a scandal where someone said the wrong thing about Israel, Palestine, Jews, whatever, and then suddenly they're canceled or temporarily canceled, right? So, there's all of these ways in which public discourse kind of gets shaped. And if you exist in the public, if you're a public figure, you kind of learn, whether explicitly or implicitly, how to maneuver around these things, right? Don't make a Nazi comparison. That's just never a good thing, right? Be very, very careful if you're going to say anything about the treatment of Palestinians, right? Or if you say something about it, you have to frame it as well, this is bad for Israel too. You kind of need to center their feelings at the end of the day, right? So these are the kinds of ways in which public discourse kind of gets shaped. Another example of anti-Semitism, according to the IHRA, is applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. That's pretty vague. That's pretty open. So,
but it's kind of like it feels straw man-ish, like you're trying to say, okay, because that's always the accusation where when people say, people were like, well, Israel, why are you committing a genocide in Gaza right now? And it's like, oh, you wouldn't expect another nation. And it's like, no, we would. We would. Yep. We don't think anybody should commit genocide, and we think you should be able to speak on it when they do. There's nothing exclusive about Israel here. I mean, so I guess this kind of points me to another thing. Like this, to me, this definition is far too expansive. I actually don't think this definition of anti-Semitism keeps Jewish people safe. But what do you think is a better in terms of a policy or a statement? Do you think it's better to not even have a specific policy like this around anti-Semitism, or are there other ones that you think are better?
Well, I think if we look at civil rights law and the way that it's developed and been interpreted over the past half century or so, no one's trying to codify a definition of anti-Black racism or of anti-Asian racism, right? Because what the law says is don't discriminate, and don't discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, being a member of such and such group, et cetera, et cetera. So, what the law is about is like looking at specific situations and asking, was this person discriminated against, and were they discriminated against on one of these bases? That's it. You don't need a sort of weirdo, bespoke, one-size-fits-all, incorporate everything pre-existing definition to do that analysis. You just look at the case and you answer the legal question of, was there discrimination, and was that discrimination on the basis of this particular identity category? That's it. So I actually don't think the answer to the IRA definition is a better definition. I think the answer is, really understanding clearly and clearly calling out what this definition is trying to do, right? Which is to really sort of limit any criticism of Israel, right? Now, of course, a lot of Zionists will say things like, well, of course, criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic. And, to be fair, they're not totally being disingenuous. I think they allow some space for critique, but that critique has to be so carefully parsed and so limited that it becomes kind of ineffective, right? So it's like, well, you have to sort of say, it's really bad that Israel did this, but they have a right to self-defense. They're doing the right thing. They have the right intentions. They're just going too far, right? So in other words, they leave a space for critique, but that critique has to be on their own terms. It has to be kind of like internal critique,
right?
Which is so not a very useful critique.
So they're allowed, right? They're allowed to say that, oh, well, we allow critique, but really, it's like you said, it's very narrow. I mean, do you see this play out in the report, in the cases you looked at for the report?
Well, yeah, I think in the sense of like, there's not a lot of examples of just someone saying Israel violated human rights law and that being called anti-Semitism. I mean, there is some examples of that, but it's not super common. So, and I think that's important because sometimes people get so paranoid where they really start censoring themselves, which of course is, not a bad outcome from the perspective of these organizations, right?
Right. That's like part of the point, right? They know they're not going to be able to prosecute every case. They really want to create a culture where you don't even feel like you're allowed to think critically, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the IRA definition. Now, this is just a nonprofit that came up with the definition. It's not law yet, right?
Right. But yeah, you see it suddenly is used with all this authority, right? Well, it's the IRA definition. You're like, this thing that just was created like in our lifetime, like that?
Yep. Mm-hmm. So this IRA definition's in the air, right? And then Obama leaves office. And then Marcus comes back into government, except now he's head of OCR. Okay, so he's back the place he used to be at. Now he's officially in charge, and he immediately takes an old investigation of Rutgers for anti-Semitism that had been closed when they said, okay, there's no finding of discrimination here, and he reopened it and said, no, take a second look, right? So, and he also convinces Trump to issue an executive order putting the IRA definition into government policy, right? So what the Trump executive order says is that government agencies, when they are investigating anti-Semitism under anti-discrimination law, they should consider the IRA definition. So it's a little vague. They don't quite say you have to use it, but it certainly legitimized it and mainstreamed it. And then when Biden comes into office, he does not rescind this order. He doesn't actively refer to it either, but he leaves it on the books. So it's still in the ether. It's still in the water that they drink, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. It's still something informing how the law is being interpreted under Biden as these cases proceed.
Exactly. And what you see with Biden, even before October 7th, is his administration puts out various policy statements on anti-Semitism that don't mention the IRA definition. But, if you look at what they're actually doing, it's very consistent with the IRA definition. And again, that's before October 7th.
Which is disturbing because what it shows is that, this is why history is so important, because you can see that when they deny that this comes specifically from IRA, from this IHRA definition, that they're moving this into the realm of common sense, right? They're trying to say, oh, no, this doesn't come from one thing. This is just what anti-Semitism is.
Exactly.
So... all right. And so what happens next?
Well, then you have October 7th. And then you have the protests. So an unprecedented, wave of mobilizations on campuses, off campuses, and the moral panic starts, right? And this groundwork that Marcus and his people, his allies, his network have been laying for all these years without that much success, right? They've been laying groundwork, but not having, they have not, pardon the expression, they have not claimed a lot of scalps so far in this, and that's a colonial expression on purpose. But but after October 7th, now the floodgates open, right, where the pressure is on, and both parties, right, are actively beating the drum of, there's anti-Semitism on campuses, it has to be brought down, and it's for the right, it's just part of their ongoing war on higher ed, right? The campuses are too woke. They need to be brought down. But now they have the liberals on their side, right? And that's where Zionism is the Achilles heel of the post-civil rights coalition and the Democratic Party coalition. And that's where you get this explosion in anti-Semitism investigations. So between October 7th, 2023 and the end of 2023, there's more anti-Semitism investigations opened against colleges and universities than in all previous years combined. And part of why I reconstructed this long history about Marcus and all this was I had this question to myself of well, why were there so few over those previous years, right? So this was not inevitable, right? This was a thing that they were trying to do that, it had its fits and starts, but it was the Biden administration that took this foundation and activated it to do this.
And I think that's it's important for so many reasons. One, during this post-October 7th, 2023 moment, there's so many of it sounds like that was really the time when the real fruit of Marcus's plan seems like it took shape, right? In one sense. And just thinking about what this looked like, from the standpoint of, myself. I talk about in Empire City, the fact that I was arrested in an encampment. I was locked arm in arm with many of my Jewish colleagues. It's interesting. On the day we were arrested, right, it was actually practicing a Passover, right? It was a demonstration between Muslim students at NYU and Muslim community members and Jewish community members who were we're gonna express our faith this way. Right, by resisting something that is clearly anti-human, that is political, and people saw what was going to happen. I remember somebody saying to me the week of October 7th, they said, "I feel like this genocide is going to occur, and we just have to watch it, and there's going to be nothing we can do to stop it." And this was a person who had family in Palestine, and if they were upset about what happened on the day of October 7th for sure. But they were saying, but this is going to lead to so much more harm. And all the voices that were trying to resist this, to me, were forces that were trying to say, hey, this is happening. We don't, every step, you don't have to go further. Let's check in where we at ethically. and I just watch those people be punished. So anyway, I know this. I think it's really important to talk about what it actually looks like and what the consequences continue to be. And that was just up till now, and this stuff is still unfolding, right?
Yep. I mean, sometimes standing on the right side of history means standing in the way of oncoming traffic, right? Standing in the way of a moving train, and too many people paid too high a price, right? And of course, yes, you can say it's nothing compared to what people in Gaza, in Palestine, experienced. Yes. But it's also true that the struggle over Palestine, or rather the struggle in Palestine and the struggle over Palestine in the imperial core, they are connected, right?
Absolutely. And I think that was, that was the other thing, is that so many of the people that were protesting were also simultaneously trying to say, we don't want the focus to be on us. Yes, we're talking about divestment, we're talking about disclosure, but we ultimately don't want the focus really on us. So let me just get you to talk for a little bit about the broader political agenda that this affects.
So there's this explosion of investigations at the end of 2023, and it continues through 2024. Right. So the record is broken again in 2024. And it's just the Democrats, kneecapping their own base, going down on their own ship, basically. And then Trump comes in. And Trump, there's this ready-made weapon that's there. And he's not interested in using it only against college kids protesting against what's happening in Palestine. He's using it to bust down the front door of higher ed and to fulfill the right's longstanding agendas, right? To dismantle all of these attempts at appearances of racial and gender equity, right? So, whether you call it affirmative action, DEI, whatever, they're just there to really knock the schools down a peg, actually quite a few pegs, right? And, also, it's a war against science, right? Against research into climate change, things like all the things that the right wants to do to bring the universities to heel. Anti-Semitism is the way in, right? Title VI is the way in. So Trump sets up this anti-Semitism task force, and they try to make an example out of Columbia and out of Harvard. So they cite Title VI. It's weird. They don't do an actual Title VI investigation. They just send them a letter saying, you violated Title VI because we say so. And there's all these things they're supposed to do in the law. They're supposed to have an investigation, give them a warning, notify Congress, wait 30 days. They don't do any of that, right? They jump immediately to, we're going to cut your funding, and, you have to bend the knee, right? So it's becoming clearer to more and more people at this point that this is really not about anti-Semitism, but it's too late. And a lot of the folks who are speaking out at this point, the liberals who are like beating their chests about, resisting authoritarianism and preserving academic freedom and so on, some of them were the same people who were loudly condemning anti-genocide protesters as anti-Semitic. So they were the ones who actually held the door open, right, for the foxes to get in the hen house, or whatever metaphor you want to use. But that's how Trump's war on higher ed kind of unfolded through this anti-Semitism task force, and it's had enormous consequences.
I think it's so important. I mean, I've seen, my friend Keonga Matatail and others have said that, Democrats really have to reckon when they want to talk about free speech, and there was a lot of strange free speech talk that started reemerging, interestingly, around Charlie Kirk. But, what Keonga said basically was, we're going to have to reckon with what about the free speech of all these people who were trying to speak against the genocide, for, as just one example, right? We need a far, if we're ever going to have a real conversation about free speech, we can't have these really egregious contradictions. And also, I think another thing was that in other places, people were wondering why there weren't more people rising up, even though there were lots of folks rising up in certain ways. But it was, again, I felt like I saw some of the same people's like, why aren't people in the streets? And it's like, well, remember when you locked all these people up for being in the streets?
Yeah, exactly.
Remember that over the last 2 years? Remember when you literally taught people the price of dissent is boom, jail, fired, Luke can't graduate. But you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's like, So you did that, and now you wonder where this force is that is supposed to respond to authoritarianism. So it's for so many reasons. But I think that this point that you're making about this being beyond anti-Semitism and it really being the key to all the other fights that we need. And we're talking about clear things here. We're talking about racial and gender equity. We're talking about empowerment. We're talking about climate change, with the biggest crisis facing all of us. We're talking about just being able to teach those things and research those things, right? Much less also to be able to protest. And this particular weaponization really was the key that unlocked all those things. And I think that's really important for people to understand. I do think that, sadly and tragically, we have not won when it comes to stopping a genocide, right? We're in this thing that's being called a ceasefire. And I know that there are many in Gaza who welcome any kind of slowdown of things. But in fact, I think it's over 240 people have been killed since the ceasefire started. Mm-hmm. But so there's not really a way where we can claim a victory. But I have heard people say that one thing that has changed over the past few years is that the cultural power of Zionism, right, and this sort of overly broad, way that you can try to wield accusations of anti-Semitism at anybody, like that has actually weakened. People are starting to see through it. And they've been able to say, wait a minute, is this actually anti-Semitism? As people committed to fighting anti-Semitism, like, is this really what this is? Or is this actually something else? What is the evidence here? What was actually said? There's space to ask those questions.
Yes.
And I think this report is so important because it does that. And then what comes up is like, oh, wow, you start to see a little bit more clearly what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it's true. There's been a massive shift, and it's generational, it's cultural, right? Zionism, compulsory Zionism as a kind of like just taken for granted thing in American culture. It's not what it was before. But that change is, it's not inevitable, and it may not be durable.
That's right.
If you want to call that an achievement, that achievement has to be protected and nurtured, because right now, with the so-called ceasefire, the attempts to kind of put the genie back in the bottle have actually gone into full swing. There's all these attempts to renormalize Zionism. U.S. schools opening up new relationships with schools in Israel, right? All these attempts to basically take the past 2 years and sort of wipe them from people's memory. Now, they may not succeed, right? Maybe the changes have been too deep, too profound, et cetera, but I don't know. I honestly don't know, and I don't like to make statements about inevitability or things like that. I'm not a believer in inevitability.
No, I'm not either. I believe that things are contingent, and it's really important for us to understand that. And I think this is something, even when people just say, oh, we're still in slavery. People want to make these comparisons, and we don't need to see history as an unbroken chain of anything, really.
Yeah.
And there's lots of moments where the chain is breaking, where people are fighting. Didn't have to be this way. And we have to hold on to that. That's not trying to. I actually think we're letting power off the hook if we assume it was an unbroken chain. For example, because in the Black liberation struggle, it's like, if you don't you have to understand how hard these systems continue to fight against Black liberation. And the only way you understand it is to understand at moments when the chain was weak or the chain was broken and got resutured. So over and over again. So I'm with you. And you to your point, you make a good point, which is that it's true that cultural Zionism, people can ask more, there's more space to ask critical questions about it. But you're right, the framework there. I mean, listen, right now in my classroom, if I want to teach a history of Zionism that is based on the empirical and historical methods, which I learned, I feel like if I do that, I'm actually violating maybe an NYU policy, because they've already said anything that is critical of Zionism is suspect here. And, and so I think a lot of folks are not going to make that choice, right?
Exactly. And
that means this, and in a way, as someone who's been teaching, and I'm sure that maybe this is the case for you too, as someone who's been teaching critical issues to do with empire for a long time and making podcasts and media, there's a stunning, jarring number of people in 2025 who are like, I've never heard this. And they were the products of the previous versions of that history being hidden. So in terms of what we do, though, as we draw to a close, I mean, what's the most useful way people can use this report and to fight what is happening here with this particular weaponization, while also staying consistent in our own fights against all forms of hate and discrimination, including anti-Semitism?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is, I guess, where we come back to sort of a plug for the mission of the AAUP. You know, we have to understand that as knowledge workers or as workers in higher ed, that, you know, we're engaged in a contest and a struggle over our institutions, and that these struggles, of course, have enormous importance beyond, right? Whether we're talking about the cultural role of these institutions in society, or we're talking about their financial investment in systems of death, destruction, exploitation, etc. And because anti-Semitism is one of the primary ways through which dissent gets silenced, I want the report to help people inform themselves and empower themselves in their contests with the bosses, with the people who run their campuses. Because one of the things that's happening right now is that all of these schools are expanding their so-called anti-discrimination policies in the name of fighting anti-Semitism, you know, to provide themselves with more weapons in their arsenal against protest, against dissent, against criticism of any kind. So we've got, you probably saw the news that at Northwestern hired a Zionist organization to produce an anti-bias training video, which was just straight up pro-Israel propaganda. And, you know, required all students and maybe faculty staff as well, I'm not sure, to watch this video and to sort of, you know, affirm that they absorbed it and learned the lessons. And a whole group of students just refused and said, we're not going to do this. And, you know, there's a lawsuit now and all these things, but there's an emerging kind of system that's being built around this stuff, and it still is not set in stone. So I think there are possibilities here and there to disrupt things, mess things up, but also, again, think of it as part of this broader struggle, right? Part of a broader struggle against governing boards of universities, you know, around the country as well. And to really ask ourselves, you know, what kind of future do we want for higher education? And how does that fit into what kind of future we want, you know, for this place, this country, this world? So, you know, this is a very small part of that, but it's you know, the tip of the spear is often the sharpest and the smallest point, right? But it's a place that I think is useful to start and to just, allow people a way to not only have facts and information, but also to have a sensibility, right? To have a skepticism about the way anti-Semitism is weaponized. I think part of what's happened through this normalization over recent decades is the opposite sensibility has been cultivated, right? You see a conversation about Israel, Palestine, you hear the word anti-Semitism, and you kind of freeze. You sort of, deep down, you're thinking, oh, there's something here I have to be very careful about, right? So I think unlearning those habits and those instincts, right, so that we can have, you know, much more forthright, honest, clear-eyed, critical analyses of what's going on is something that's important, not only on this issue, but just more broadly. And I think that's why, for example, with Mamdani, just to take something that's out of field, but also relevant. You know, I think part of his appeal comes not despite his stances on Palestine, but because of them, right? Like when he was asked,
absolutely,
you know, where are you going to go when all those mayoral candidates promised, oh, we're going to go to Israel, and he was like, no, that's crazy. What that signals to people is, if you are willing to not debase yourself in this ridiculous way around Israel, that's a signal that you are willing to take stances on all of the other things that matter and that the establishment does not want, right? So, you know, it may not be the case that that it's, you know, that is the number one reason why they voted for him. Of course, they care about affordability. That's what his campaign is about. But it's a sign. It's a sign that, like, this is different.
Well, yeah, I mean, you should not have to, for example, pronounce that there is as a politician, I would say as a historian, as a politician, as a person, you should never have to pronounce that you're not going to think critically about a state.
Yeah.
You know, that should never be a part of what you have to say, you know, and I think that you're right. I think when people have seen that, I mean, keep in mind, New York is one of the places where this battle played out. People have seen it. And I think, yeah, you're right. It signals where somebody's going to be on other issues. It's really important. And I just want to also really appreciate everything you said, but especially the part about the fact that we have to have a positive vision for higher education, right? I mean, and understanding this report really helps us to understand something that's in the way of that. But ultimately, part of how we have to fight it is we can't only be thinking about our work as defensive because, we were already, previous to Trump 2.0, trying to envision a better higher education that works in the common good, to try to think critically about the limitations of what higher education has been, what it is, what it's done in terms, how it's been manipulated by the finance industry with student debt, and, how it needs to be decolonized in all these different ways, right? I like, for me, I have no problem with the term decolonization, but I also think, like, to me, as a historian, it's just better history. The stuff I'm looking at is better history. It's more empirically justified history that has, more receipts and helps us understand the world with a stronger explanatory framework. That's what I'm about. You know what I mean? I'm actually, people have heard me say this in other contexts. There's a lot of violence that gets done in the name of objectivity, but I actually think objectivity is important, because when I claim that something's a genocide, that's just not my subjective opinion. That's an analysis based on empirical evidence to me. So empirical evidence and empiricism is not the only way to understand the world. But my point is that the kind of things that are being shut down by the Trump administration, the kind of education, the kind of political analyses that people are organizing around, those things are grounded in real facts.
Yep.
And it matters. Thank you to you. Thank you to, shout out to Middle Eastern Studies Association, other people that worked on this report. We want to shout out again.
Oh, well, there's a whole team. I want to appreciate and salute Asla Bali, president of the Middle East Studies Association.
Asla, much respect.
And Janan Shahab, the co-author of the report, Ladadib, also Ladadib, who's my co-chair on the task force for civil and human rights. And of course,
sorry.
And you're my favorite person, Vina Dubal at the AAUP.
That's right. Shout out to everybody. And you know what, Asla, we didn't give you your horns. Come on, man. Work ain't easy. We got to celebrate. All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. And by the way, we're going to have you back on again at some point, because people that I know that know your work are like, oh my God, Daryl's work is so complicated. It's so many interesting. So we just zoomed in on this one period and you were very disciplined. But next time I want to actually zoom out even more and just hear about your work, because you're so good at the work you do and at sharing it. And that's what we about on Unruly Subjects. You know what I'm saying? So give it up, everybody. Unruly Subjects for Daryl Lee.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm a big fan of you, big fan of the podcast. Great conversation. And you know where I live, so anytime.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. All right, y'all. That was Daryl Lee. I told y'all Daryl was going to bring it. You know what I mean? I don't know what you thought it was. But now, an important update in our ice cream mission. As you may know, a few weeks ago, my daughter issued a call for us to figure out the best ice cream in New York. And we've been step by step moving into that mission. So last week, we spoke to an expert, Lauren Kalin, and she helped us solve the problem of how to move ice cream from one establishment to another while still keeping the ice cream fresh. And we took in Lauren's expert advice, and this led to me ordering some gadgets, some very special gear. And a few days ago, the gear came. So when Yola and I got together after dinner, and we opened the box to take the next step in building our ice cream transportation device.
I'm excited. Why do we need a knife?
Well, I was going to use the knife to open it, but now we don't need it because we have scissors. Now, in this box is a part of our ice cream machine.
Can we open it?
Yeah, we're gonna open it. But first we have to make some pretend cones. So get your paper.
You know what? I know how to make a cone, but I need to cut it in a circle to make a cone. So you fold it like that. Mm-hmm. You kind of fold it, and I think you're gonna. Oh, I know.
Okay, can you make a cone like what you made? The same cone that you made, but a little bigger?
Daddy, what are you thinking? That's your make-believe cone. I like it.
Who made that tall doofy one?
Daddy.
Oh, mine is goofy? All right. So these are our test cones, okay?
For testing cones.
Are you ready to open the box?
Yes.
Ba, 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 ba.
Oh, I know what that is for. That's for to put the ice cream in.
Yeah.
Do we need batteries?
I don't think so, because this is just part of our machine. So here's what we're going to do, Enyola.
Yeah,
We're going to get a cooler like made of styrofoam, and then we're going to put this in there, and then we're going to put something called dry ice in there. And then we can like get an ice cream cone, put it in there, keep it, and then get the other one from the other place and keep that.
Fine.
All right, Enyola, you're just here to, you didn't care about this device. You just wanted to get a scoop of ice cream in the end of the day. You didn't even care about this, do you? Be honest.
I do care.
But you know what, Yola, you're working. You're doing some work.
I'm trying to realize your vision. This was your idea.
No, really?
Not true.
You know, now I'm just alone.
No, you're not. I'm helping.
Yeah, you're helping. You're helping. It's
What is
good.
that?
We're taking a step closer. Now we got to get a styrofoam. I think they sell those at I might be able to get those across the street. You know what I'm saying?
Maybe. I don't know.
I think they got them over there. But the real quest is going to be the dry ice.
You might be able to. I wonder if we can get it at least.
All right, y'all. Dry ice is the next step in our ice cream mission. We're going to get a cooler. You know what I mean? Got our device straight. And we're going to go even deeper into this ice cream journey. We got to pick out some ice cream establishments to test. So in 2026, that's going to be our year. Yo, we dragging y'all with us on this. I don't know, folks. It might get ugly, but it'll definitely be delicious. And by the way, if you want to check out the ice cream, the fake paper ice cream cone I made, which, by the way, I don't think it's goofy, you can go to our Patreon, unrulysubjectspodcast.com, and post a picture of our ice cream cones, you know what I'm saying? And you can check it out. So thank you for going with us on this delicious mission. Unruly Subjects is produced in partnership with Rohome Productions. Boy, I'm proud of Rohome. Alex Lewis is Rohome's creative director. John Myers is Rohome's executive producer. Shout out and thank you to my wife Sadaka, my daughter Enyola. Big shout out to my assistant Carissa. Appreciate you, Carissa. Shout out to our special guest, Daryl Lee. Daryl, boy, you was bringing it. We're gonna have you back on. Our theme music was composed by Axel Kakutier. Alex Tatusian made our tile art. Thanks to all the people that call our voicemails. If you got something to tell us, got some feedback, got an ice cream update, you got some news, call the Unruly Hotline, 215-436-9212. You never know. Might call you back. We're taking a little break for the rest of December, but we'll be back in January. Make sure you subscribe. Follow us on Instagram @UnrulySubjectsPod and @Chinjirai. And if you like our show, tell everybody you know. Spread the good news. Spread the word. You know what I'm saying? We'll see y'all in January with some more heat. Rohome Productions. Unruly Subjects is supported by listeners just like you. Join us at patreon.com/unrulysubjects.